I'm Sarah Wilson and you're listening to the Roots and All podcast. I'm here to help you get growing. Join me as I explore everything plant related both indoors and out and provide the information you need to create your perfect green environment. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. This episode I'm speaking to Jake Rayson. Jake lives in rural Wales on a 2-acre smallholding, which is set up as a working forest garden. And because Jake lives in deepest, darkest Wales, there are times when the phone reception drops out a little, so my apologies for that. In addition to managing his own plot, Jake also teaches about and designs forest gardens in the UK and beyond. For a long time, forest gardening was one of those terms I'd heard, but I'm not sure if I fully understood the principles behind it, partly because the term always struck me as a bit of a misnomer. Essentially, it seems to be a common sense and ecologically respectful way of organising a productive garden. The first question I asked Jake was if he could explain exactly what it entails.
So forest gardening is a productive way of gardening that works with nature to be sustainable and low maintenance. A kind of an easy way of understanding it is like an orchard underplanted with edible shrubs and perennial vegetables.
So when you say productive, does everything in it have to be edible or are we talking other ways of producing things from it?
Oh, other ways. I mean, there's a whole range of different things that you can be productive in a number of different ways. So you can have crops that you use for poles, so bamboo canes, and for firewood, and for building supports. So it could be string. You can make tying materials from various plants as well, and there are also system plants that support the garden as a whole, the ecosystem as a whole. It's not productive necessarily just being edible. It's a whole range of different things that you can produce.
And could you have stuff in it that was ornamental, or is that breaking the rules?
Absolutely not. I mean, it's absolutely fine to have ornamental things in there. I mean, your previous guest, Stephen Barstow, is a bit of a hero, and he had the whole idea of edible ornamentals is I think a really useful one for forest gardening because it opens it up to an awful lot more people. If they know that it can be ornamental and edible, that's a really good thing.
Yeah, I think so, because to be honest, I assumed that everything had to be productive, but it's good to know that you can incorporate other stuff as well. It doesn't feel quite so limiting to maybe those of us who started out in an ornamental growing background. Do you have to have a particular amount of space to have a forest garden, or can anyone do it anywhere?
You can create a forest garden in any size, really. I mean, most people start off who are interested in forest gardening, I think traditionally start off with about an acre or so of land. But it's the principles that are really, really important. And if trying to understand what a forest garden is in the first place, and you can apply those principles to any size garden. I mean, I've done designs for a small front garden, 10 metres by 5 metres, I think it was. So yeah, it can be. I've even heard of people creating a forest garden in a large pot, one of those big kind of pot containers. So you can do it. You apply the principles to any size. It doesn't have to be a large space at all. And I think it's like the whole principle of it is that a forest garden mimics a woodland edge. So rather than a thick woodland, it's a woodland edge where you're getting enough light coming through. So that means you can create layers of planting, and that's absolutely crucial. And that you're efficiently using the space that you have. So you have a variety of different levels, with a permanent living ground cover. So the soil is permanently covered. You're using all the available space, and there's enough light getting through for the crops on the ground. And the absolutely critical part of it is that it provides its own nutrients and its own pest control as well. So it's a self-sustaining system. So if you can replicate that, you can replicate that in any size garden. There's a chap called Robert Hart. He's a pioneer in the UK back in the 1980s, I think it was, in Wenlock Edge in Shropshire. And he had, I think it was only about a quarter of an acre or so. And he decided that a small holding was too much work for him, and he went a vegan. And he was looking after his brother, apparently, and he went onto a vegan diet and grew all his own food.
if you wanted to establish a garden and say you'd inherited a garden that already had some stuff growing in it, was maybe a bit established, how would you go about turning it into a forest garden? Is that a really complicated question?
Yes, I mean, it depends an awful lot on what plants you've got growing there in the first place. I mean, there's quite a few. I mean, there is dozens of different species. I mean, the kind of common ones, the easy to grow ones, Hemerocallis, like daylily, which are very really good edible ornamental. Hostas, fuchsias. I mean, there are. I think it's Magellanica.
Mm-hmm.
Fuchsia Magellanica is one of the hardier ones, and it has the best tasting fruit apparently. Yeah, Cornus mass, Cornelian cherry, Cornus cusa. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of crossover.
What bits of those do you eat?
The berry. I actually haven't eaten them yet myself. The ones I've planted haven't fruited yet. But looking forward to it. The Cornus, yeah, they're kind of little kind of. They look like little strawberries, like slightly tough-skinned strawberries. They're kind of very interesting looking, and beautiful flowers.
Do you have to be careful when you buy things like that you're buying the female plants?
Check when you're buying it whether it's a fruiting plant or not. You really do have to be aware of the which one you're buying. There's obviously, this is like across the board for all different plants, but there's like a sea buckthorn. You need to make sure that you've got a male plant for a pollinator and a female plant for the berries. But for Cornus mass, it should kind of clear when you're buying it whether it's fruiting or not. If you're buying, and this is the interesting thing, if you're buying from a specialist nursery, then they'll tell you whether it's a fruit, whether you will get fruit from it and whether it requires a pollinating partner. Or...
I think that actually goes back to what as you mentioned, Stephen, he was saying that if you are buying things to eat, you need to be pretty careful about where you source them from. So going back to if you were starting out doing a forest garden, what are some of the things that people might struggle with when they are starting out or establishing a forest garden?
I think first of all, it's knowing where to get the information from. Yeah, once you've got a decent reference, but you're actually knowing what the plants are that you want to grow, there's kind of few things that people get tripped up over. And I think the first of all is design. Design isn't really well taught in this country in terms of design generally, but also garden design. And people get the fear of putting down on a piece of paper where the plants should go in a garden. And it's absolutely critical with a forest garden, if you've got any space at all, you'll be planting trees. And it's absolutely critical that you plant trees far enough apart so that there's enough light comes through. But when they reach their final size, there's enough light coming through past the plants to lower levels so that you can grow plants underneath and that you get proper fruiting. So I'd say like the design stage is always a bit tricky, but the best thing you can do is to get some graph paper and measure up your plot, even if it's very approximately, and then work out where the trees will go, work out where the canopy layer will go.
How do you manage the kind of gap in between? You do need to plan a garden and plant a garden so that it's kind of in maturity, everything fits together and there's room for stuff. But then that sometimes if things are slightly slower growing, you may have gaps until those things knit together. Do you do anything? Can you do anything in forest gardening to fill the gaps in, maybe temporarily?
It's good to have a range of different plants that you can use. I think this is one of the fallacies of a forest garden is that it's only perennials that you're using. You can use annual plants, which will take advantage of the conditions until the plants mature. When you're putting in whips for the trees, you're going to have an awful lot more sunlight. So you actually want something that can deal with full sun. And then as you get more shade, you want the other ground cover to take over. So, for example, you might be planting clover as a temporary ground cover with some a dwarf comfrey ground cover, and the clover does very well. And then when the shade increases, the clover dies back and the comfrey takes over. So yeah, you can design it so that you've got some sort of succession going on. And also for hedges, though, I'd always recommend people, if you've got the space, is always to plant a double hedge to fill the gaps in as quickly as possible.
Can you have an edible hedge?
You certainly can, in more ways than one. I mean, there's it really helps if you can propagate your own. If you've got the time to propagate your own hedging plants, that's fantastic, because you get fruiting varieties and hedging varieties. Normally you buy a hedging variety of a plant in the winter and you plant it bare root, but normally they're not particularly good at fruiting, whereas a fruiting variety of a plant, say for example autumn olive, a fruiting variety is pot grown and is 4 or 5 times the price, but you can take cuttings from it, and then from those cuttings you can create a really truly edible hedge. It'll fruit much better. And other examples are seed buckthorn, barberries. There's a Guelder rose. Well, actually, there's a close relation to the Guelder rose called viburnum. I can't remember the name of it. It's a North American high bush cranberry, which is closely related to the Guelder rose, and that has more edible berries. So there's a lot of windbreak plants that you can use, which you can eat. But also you can grow climbers up through the hedge. So if you've got a hedge which is along the northern boundary of your property, and it's 4 to 5 meters high, and then obviously that'll be facing the sun, and then you can grow a thornless bramble, for example, up through that hedge, and then you're getting a double crop then.
I think I might have led you off on a tangent. Did you cover all your kind of tips for success when people are starting out?
Oh no, there's loads more.
Carry on.
My top tip is to start by the house, start near the house and work out, so that you plant something close to the house. And I always kind of encourage people to plant vegetables. And a really easy way into creating a forest garden is to start with perennial vegetables. And then you're getting a relatively quick return on your crop, and it enables you to you can then, once you've got that established, then you can move outwards, and do it section by section. Don't be afraid about having an area of your garden that is a bit wild, just with trees in it. But concentrate on planting up one area at a time, rather than trying to do, which is what I did when we moved here. Rather than try to plant everything at once, you plant it section by section. Windbreaks are some of the most important things to actually give the protection to the plants. If you're living somewhere which is exposed and you don't have any windbreaks, plants will really, really suffer. They'll take twice as long to get established, whereas if you put windbreaks in, then the plants will grow much, much quicker. Start with something simple and colourful and productive. So I always kind of say to people, plant up something like a forage or comfrey. So you're getting flowers and you're getting a crop from it. You can use it as a compost for nutrients as well.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were speaking actually about the idea of making a garden that's productive for you. How much space does that leave you for encouraging wildlife?
Well, if you've got hedges, I think this is the way to look at it is, if you have any windbreaks, like windbreak hedges and system plants, so plants that are providing nutrients, for example, then there's enough space to create wildlife habitat as well. So there's plenty of space to have both. Any garden that you're designing, you can think about wildlife, encouraging wildlife from the beginning. And with a forest garden, that's absolutely critical, because you're relying upon wildlife for pest control in the first place. So you want to factor that in when you're planting it up.
So would a forest garden, by definition, be organic as well?
Yeah, so a forest garden, is organic. Ultimately, you're not bringing anything onto the site. The whole garden is a self-contained ecosystem that it provides its own nutrients and its own pest control. So you're not bringing in any additional fertilizer at all, and obviously no pesticides.
And I think I asked this question of Stephen Barstow as well, but I'd like to ask it of you. Are you self-sufficient, or do you feel that you could be in the future?
I think you can be. We're definitely not. We're in the early stages of it, and I used to get a bit stressed out about the fact that we're not self-sufficient yet. But I think it's much more important to get the bare bones of the garden in place, and then take as much time as you need to generate the harvest, because it's a lot of land. I mean, we've got 2 acres here, so we have the original forest garden, which has been going for 5 coming up for 5 years, and then another 1 acre garden. And when you're establishing a garden, it's a good idea to put the windbreaks in first, then plant the trees. But then you can leave it fallow. You can leave the ground as wild, as wild. If it's pasture, you can leave the ground as rough pasture, and then just mow it once or twice a year, and then do it section by section, plant up the understory bit by bit. So yeah, we will get there, but it won't be for a few years, because there are any vegetable garden do you grow vegetables? I don't know if you're a vegetable gardener as well.
Not really. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone. It's all right. No one's listening. I hate growing veg. It's like my least favourite thing. I just can't do it. I've got like a physical block. I can't do it. I did a bit last year, and next year I have huge plans. And there's a big project that will involve me growing a hell of a lot. But no, if I was left to my own devices and I didn't feel completely guilty, I wouldn't do it at all. No.
I think it's really interesting. I think because it's a bit of a crossover. But I did some work last summer in the local market gardens, and they're vegan organic market garden, about 3 acre site, and they're really good. But they just do annual vegetables, and they don't have a minute spare in the day, and it is hard bloody work. It's propagation and planting things out and watering and weeding and watering and weeding and watering and weeding, harvesting. It's non-stop. Anyone who produces their own vegetables knows that it takes a lot of time, no matter whether you're harvesting sweet chestnuts or whether you're harvesting potatoes. It's a lot of time. There's a lot of time involved.
Yeah, and just prepping it. I mean, God, cleaning it is unbelievable.
Yep. And I think you kind of underestimate that when you think, we'll go self-sufficient. You don't think about the amount of time that it takes to actually prep stuff. We've got there's some perennial peppers, which are really nice little plants. What they're called, Alberto Locato or something, from Real Seeds over in Newport in Wales. And they're kind of much hardier chilies, and they produce really well. Little round chilies with black seeds. And we've got hundreds of them, absolutely bloody hundreds. And I'm trying to ripen them up at the moment. And you hang them up on the wall. They look nice, but goodness me, they take a long time. And that's just the chilies, and then you've all the other crops that you're doing as well.
Yeah.
So it is a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a lot of work, I think, as well for perennial vegetables. I mean, I again, doing it by stages. That you put the windbreaks. You put the windbreaks in first of all. Then you've got your canopy trees, which your big fruit trees, and your apple trees, and your nut trees. And then you put your bushes in, and then you get your herbaceous perennials, which are your perennial vegetables. And you still got to look after them. You know what I mean? You can't just let them do their own thing. You've got to make sure that they're not eaten by slugs, and they're getting enough light and all the rest of it. They have to be cared for just like any other plant.
It sounds as if, though, if you get it right, you get it as you are from, you're kind of establishing it from the ground up. In theory, it should involve less maintenance than kind of traditional veg growing, I presume.
Yep, absolutely. But it's getting it set up and that's the important point. Is it's getting it set up in the first place. Setting up a forest garden takes a lot of effort and time and attention.
You are really selling it. I mean, I can't wait to start mine.
but this is the question. I mean, you asked about how long does it take, the questions that you sent over. And it's interesting because it's how long does any garden take to set up? To get any garden established takes years.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and it's funny. I remember my mum's a teen gardener. And I remember as a kid, we'd look at all the little plants growing everywhere, and she said, "Oh, do you like my garden? Do you like the planting?" I would go, "Well, they're a bit twiggy," and it would be a couple of years later, and they'd fill out, and you go, "Oh, I see what you're doing. I see what you mean."
Yeah.
But it's that it takes time. I mean, sweet chestnuts are interesting. Case in point, they take, and again, you need to make sure that you get a fruiting variety rather than like a non-fruiting variety for sweet chestnuts, because if you just get the bare root ones that you grow for timber, that it can take 10, 15 years for the nuts for them to bear fruit, so for the nuts to come. Whereas if you buy a name variety, then it can be anything between 2, 3, 4 years. And then it takes about 12 years, or 10, 12 years, 15 years for the tree to mature. And then you're getting about 30 to 40 kilos of sweet chestnuts.
Wow.
So it's once you've got it set up and it's producing, then you've just got the harvesting and the prepping of the food.
That small part.
Yeah, just that small part. But once it does get going, then it's incredible. But it's the time in setting that up in the first place.
I mean, it sounds as if really what you want to do is to go, when you buy a house, buy one with a ready-made forest garden in the back. But then actually what that made me think was, why aren't we doing this in our public spaces? It sounds as if it lends itself perfectly to that kind of environment. Yep.
There is a lot of work being done by various people across the UK. There's a group called the National Forest Garden Scheme. Was it NFGS? National Forest Garden Scheme. There are quite a lot of schemes where people are trying to push the idea of forest gardening into civic gardening. And there is, but it's like with any garden, you do have the management issues. So you're going to be having, if you have a fruit crop and it's next to a road, you're going to get a mass of fruit. If people don't pick the fruit, then there's a mass of fruit on the road or on the pavement which needs to be cleared up. So it's always, it's not you've got to be careful about it. Yeah, and it depends where you're doing it and who can maintain it. It's always it's the same old kind of question. But yes, you'd think that there'd be more kind of planting for nut trees or what have you.
Yeah, well, I think that ultimately we can't keep passing it off onto other people and can't keep asking who is going to maintain things, because really we don't have the resources. We need to just actually step up and go, well, this is a community garden, so therefore the community needs to manage it and maintain it. But that's just me getting on my high horse. Anyway, I was just going to move on to, there's a last couple of questions which are, before we run out of time, are there any essential features in a forest garden? What are the kind of things you must include in it?
The essential features are that it mimics the edge of a woodland, which means that it can have layers of planting, that you generally have a canopy layer, and then a shrub layer, and then a herbaceous kind of perennial layer underneath that with a ground cover, and that's a permanent ground cover, so you never have the bare soil exposed. And the key to all this is that it provides its own nutrients and its own pest control as well.
Sounds like my perfect sort of garden. I hate bare soil, so that is great.
This is one of the key things. You're trying to explain it to people when you say, what's it like? What's a forest garden? And then you say, well, imagine an orchard which has been underplanted with edible shrubs and with perennial vegetables, with a permanent living ground cover that you don't have to mow. And that's pretty much a forest garden. You chuck in a windbreak and a couple of fertiliser plants like comfrey, and that's it. Yeah, I mean, on the countryside, I mean, there's no composting either. So in terms of providing nutrients, you have nitrogen provided by nitrogen-fixing plants like autumn olive and sea buckthorn, and members of the pea family, so the Scotch broom, and a member of the alder family as well. So Italian alders is one of the kind of key plants that you have in a forest garden, and they provide the nitrogen. And then you have potassium plants like comfrey, or members of the comfrey family. So like the sterile Bocking 14, you can just chop and drop it. You just literally plant a comfrey underneath each fruit tree, and then once or twice a year you chop it, and then you just put it at the base of the tree, and it gradually rots down, and that provides enough nutrients for that tree for a year. There's no composting. That's the whole kind of critical part of it. And at a pond, you've got to have a pond in there.
Yeah, definitely. For pest control?
For pest control, for slugs control, and log piles, and kind of wildlife garden features. All the kind of features you'd have in a wildlife garden, you want them in a forest garden as well. So you're providing habitat for predators of pests.
Last question. Well, last but one really. What would you say are the top performing plants in your forest garden? If someone wanted to kind of pick maybe 2 or 3, what would you recommend?
Oh, that's tricky. I would say that comfrey is absolutely indispensable because of what I said earlier. It provides nectar and pollen for bees, and it provides nutrients as well. Autumn olive, Elaeagnus umbellata, because it grows to about 5 meters by 4 meters, It's nitrogen fixing, grows quickly, and it provides shelter. It's got kind of big thorns on it, and it provides shelter for wildlife. And Gelder rose is native to the UK, Viburnum oculus. Beautiful. It's a really beautiful plant, and it's kind of quick growing as well, and has an amazing display of flowers and a display of berries that are eaten by birds. And sweet chestnut. If you've got enough space, that'd be my one nut tree that I'd have, because it's a bit more resistant to squirrels. And hawthorn. There's an amazing range of different hawthorns that you can buy. I've got a lovely one here, Crataegus arnoldiana, which is just like really, really big haws on it. It's just an incredible plant, and very beautiful as well.
Just don't try and weed underneath it.
You can avoid the spines, you'll be all right.
They are a bit evil, but not as bad as blackthorn. So if people want to find out a bit more about forest gardening, did it originate anywhere in particular, or is there someone who's the sort of pioneer of it? Where would people find out more?
It originated in the tropics, so there've been kind of forest gardens, like homesteads, integrated with the natural landscape, and they've been in the tropics for centuries. But in cool temperate zone in the UK, there's a chap called Robert Hart who pioneered it in the 1980s, and then he died, I think, in about 2002 or something. And the Martin Crawford at the Agroforestry Research Trust has written a fantastic book called Creating a Forest Garden, which is brilliant. It tells you how to design a forest garden and gives you a big list of plants as well. So he's very much worth looking into. There's Plants for a Future, which is a database of useful plants. Orange Pippin, which is a database for fruit tree varieties, which is fantastic.
Oh, I love their trees as well. I always get my fruit trees from them.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Oh, right. I get the Agroforestry and Martin Crawford sells quite a few fruit trees, like Maidens. But I didn't know. Yeah, I knew that they sold them. They got a little kind of sister website that sells them.
Yeah,
and then the RHS Plant Finder with their native filter is brilliant for finding native plants and kind of gives backup information. And then perennial vegetables, Alison Tyndale at Backyard Larder, Mandy Barber at Incredible Vegetables, and Stephen Barstow at Ornamentals.
And all the links to those useful resources are in the show notes, as well as links to Jake's website, Forest Garden Wales, where you can sign up to Jake's free course on forest gardening. If you're interested in learning more, do sign up to his newsletter too, as he's launching an online course in the next few weeks. So that's it for this episode. A very big thank you to Jake, and thanks to you for listening, and I'll catch you next Tuesday. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website www.rootsandall.co.uk, where you'll also find my blog and a sign-up form for the newsletter, which gives you a weekly roundup of content, plus the inside scoop on things like upcoming guests. Or you can subscribe wherever you normally get your podcasts. Email me with comments and feedback at podcast@rootsandall.co.uk. Follow me on Twitter, Roots and All, Facebook, Roots and All UK, and Instagram, Roots and All Pod. But please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support my work, because if you like what I do, please help me to continue doing it. Even if you make a one-off donation of £1, trust me, it all helps, and I will be immensely grateful. So please go to Patreon and search for Roots and All.